On Monday, the 20th of August 2018, a 15-year-old girl decided not to go to school. Which is not so remarkable in and of itself. When I was 15, I had a number of classmates who would often decide not to come to school now and again. Twagging is what we called it in Hull, where I grew up. Not that I ever twagged myself, certainly not if my mum and dad are watching this video. But this 15-year-old girl didn't decide to spend the day watching Netflix or on her Xbox, or even going down to the park to drink cheap cider with her mates. Instead, she travelled into central Stockholm that morning and went to the Swedish Parliament building and stood outside. She did very little, in fact. She just stood there with a sign that she'd made at home, which read, "Skolstryk for klimatet." Now, my Swedish isn't great, in fact it's non-existent, but I'm reliably informed that that translates in English as school strike for climate. And she stood there with her sign all day. Her name was Greta Thunberg, and over the last 2 years she has inspired millions of young people from over 150 different countries to speak out and demand action to prevent climate change. I suspect you will have seen her on the news. You might have even seen one of these climate strikes yourself. I saw one in Durham a couple of months ago. I was out in the Durham marketplace, and there were about 100 young people who were standing there with signs and banners making their voice heard. It's remarkable that in an age where young people are often demonised and often characterised as being idle, that these young people are making a stand and trying to make our world a better place. But what is even more remarkable is how it all started. Not with great fanfare, not with money or a great advertising campaign, not with powerful or influential people getting behind it, but with a 15-year-old girl and a cardboard sign she made the night before. Now Jesus, when it comes to Palm Sunday, is surrounded by a whole crowd of people. But actually something very similar is going on. You see, the picture we often have of the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem is where the people of Jerusalem come out to greet Jesus as he arrives. They throw down their coats and they wave their palm branches in the air and they celebrate the arrival of the one true King. This picture has actually very little to do with Greta Thunberg standing outside the Swedish Parliament building. But actually this picture has not a lot to do with what we read from Matthew's Gospel. Have a look. Go back and read that reading once again. Have a look at our video. I've been reading it on our YouTube channel. Where does the crowd come from? Who is it that are waving palms? What's the reaction of the people in Jerusalem? You might like to pause this video and have a look. Because those who are crowding round Jesus and waving palm branches are not the people from the city. They're the people who are travelling to Jerusalem with Jesus. Because for the last year or so, Jesus has mostly been in Galilee, a northern hill country, a bit of a backwater to be honest. But he's done things and said things there that have convinced people that he is God's true King, the long-promised Messiah. And now the King is coming home to Jerusalem, to the city of kings, to God's holy city. And he isn't coming alone. All the people who have been following Jesus, the 12 disciples, women like Mary Magdalene, Joanna and Susanna, who have been funding Jesus' ministry, and many others too, they're coming because they believe that this is when Jesus is going to usher in God's kingdom in all its fullness. They believe that God is on the move, that something is going to happen, and they are coming to be a part of it. But this is not a grand parade into the city. The people with Jesus are peasants, fishermen, outsiders. They're a real ragtag bunch of misfits, country folk from the north. Matthew tells us there were a great number of them, probably a few hundred. Not a lot maybe compared to the inhabitants of Jerusalem though, but they were making a great deal of noise. There were no horses or chariots, just Jesus sitting on a donkey. It's a bit of a ramshackle business, to be honest. But Matthew tells us that the people of Jerusalem are in turmoil. Who is this, they ask? Who is this group of nobodies coming from the north? And why are they saying that this teacher with them is the king? This isn't like some great organised march, like those ones that you see on TV, with thousands of people walking through London or somewhere, where they go to Hyde Park and politicians address them from a stage, and there's a great sound system. This isn't like that at all. This is more like Greta Thunberg standing outside the Swedish Parliament with her homemade sign. No wonder the well-to-do inhabitants of Jerusalem missed what was really going on. That this was the king, arriving in triumph. But those who had been with Jesus, those ordinary folk, they saw what was happening here. No wonder they shouted so hard. No wonder they grabbed whatever they could, branches from the trees, to celebrate Jesus' arrival. Because this was God on the move. This was the start of something that would change the world. This was the beginning of 7 days that would shake the universe to its foundations. It begins not with a fanfare, not with a choreographed display of military might, not with great riches, but with a ragtag crowd of people waving tree branches in the air and shouting Hosanna. It begins with Jesus riding into Jerusalem not in glory, but on the back of a donkey. God works so often not through the rich, not through the famous or the influential, for such things mean very little in his kingdom. God works through people like me and you, and when he does that, he can change the world. Greta Thunberg did that with her cardboard box and a lot of determination. I wonder how God can work through us, through you and me, because he can, and he does, and he will. Just like he worked through those people on that first Palm Sunday. And through us, through them, God changes the world. I don't know if that actually seems a bit far-fetched to you. I wonder if you're sitting there listening to what I'm saying and thinking, well, it's very nice for the young vicar to think that. That's not really the way the world works, is it? How on earth can God use me to change the world? Well, if the stories of Greta Thunberg and of that Palm Sunday haven't convinced you, then let me try one last one. Archbishop Desmond Tutu was one of the most important figures in South Africa at the end of apartheid. Within a country torn apart by racial division, injustice and violence, he led the calls for reconciliation. His voice was key as that country teetered on the edge. He spoke out for truth. He spoke out for justice, but also for forgiveness and love. And he changed the world, even though he came from pretty humble origins himself. In fact, he tells the story of how one day as a child he and his mother were walking along the road. Just ahead of them, coming the other way, was a priest by the name of Trevor Huddleston. Now, the priest was white, and the Tutus were a black family. The law stated that black people should step off the pavement and let white people pass first. Desmond and his mother prepared to step into the road. But then something amazing happened. Trevor Huddleston stepped into the road himself. He stepped aside to let Desmond Tutu and his mother through. What is more, he tipped his hat at Desmond Tutu's mother, a sign of respect that was unthinkable under the strict apartheid laws. This was the first time Desmond Tutu said he had seen a white person pay respect to a black person, and it had a profound effect on him. It was a small action, but an action which spoke of the fact that in God's kingdom, people were valued and of great worth, no matter who they are. It was an action that spoke of the true King, that spoke of Jesus. whose kingdom lies above all the laws of men. It was an action that changed Desmond Tutu's life, and through him, God changed the world. None of us might end up addressing the United Nations like Greta Thunberg, but we can be like Trevor Huddleston, faithful in what we do. Faithful in the small things. Faithful even when it seems that it makes no difference at all. Faithful to the true King, to Jesus, in whose kingdom small things matter, and small actions can change the world. Faithful to Jesus, who arrived in Jerusalem on a donkey, who arrived with calls at people crying out in triumph. People like you and me, who God used to change the world, because that's what he does. Amen.